Good morning. It's Tuesday, July the 6th, and we continue with the Sermon on the Mount, and we're at that part where Jesus says, "Again, you have heard it said, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows that you make to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all." And then he gives examples from contemporary life about the things that people would swear by, and concludes by saying, "Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." Now, I'm trying to think of examples of people swearing by stuff, and I really couldn't come up with much. You know that some of the Amish and Mennonite people, when called to testify in court, will not make that oath, so help me God. They have an alternative version of it so they don't have to swear. But other than that, I really couldn't think of much, except that when you make a promise, you ought to keep that promise. Now, in seminary, I worked for several years, 3 years, in the same church for the same fellow. And Dr. Bob was always saying stuff, And one time he said, "Hey, I got a great idea. Let's go to Florida and do beach ministry during spring break." And the other seminarians and I were looking at each other thinking, well, it doesn't sound like a bad idea. But what's the plan? Where are we going to stay? Who's going to pay for the tickets? How are we going to, move around in Florida and all of that stuff? Aside from the kind of terror of walking up to people on a beach and saying, "Let me tell you about Jesus." Anyway, he, then went off to talk about other ideas that he had, and that one went away. So that was kind of a joke. But I didn't know that for sure. And I asked another guy that had worked more closely with him the previous summer, and I said, "Hey, how do you know when he's going to do something and when he's just spouting off?" And Stuart said, "The second time that he mentions something, I start working on it. And the third time that he mentions it, I execute immediately. So what you got to do is just wait to see if he says it again. If he says it again, we got to get busy. If he says it a third time, it should be happening." Well, that was a pretty good rule of thumb for that fellow, and we both survived our student training. But saying things that you don't mean, if you're not clearly joking around, can be problematic. And Jesus is saying, just whatever you say, let your yes be yes, and let your no be no. You don't have to, gussy it up with all these promises and stuff. Just say yes or no and then act accordingly. So let your word be good, just because it's your word. And we've all known of, stories of the old days when nobody ever wrote a contract. They just shook hands and they said, that's how it's going to be. And often that's how it was. These days you have written stuff and documents and contracts and lawyers and all that just to make sure that everybody follows the rules and does what they've promised they're going to do. I don't think that we've become less trustworthy. I do think that with more people in our society, we've had a need for this kind of thing. So let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. If you're going to propose outlandish things like, let's go to Florida, and you're serious, then say, "I'm serious." And if you're not serious, then let's, laugh and say, "That's a joke." But let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. You don't need all that other fancy oaths and stuff to prove what you mean. Let your actions prove what you're going to do. See you tomorrow.